Okay, we are live on Facebook.
Great. Since we are live on Facebook, we're 7 minutes past the hour, and I am calling the meeting to order. Haley, would you please assist with roll call?
Yes. Chair Keener,
Present.
Vice Chair Allegado,
Present.
Commissioner Maynard,
Present.
Commissioner Kaufman,
Present.
and Commissioner Fletcher.
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you, Haley. All right. As our third agenda item and the most important agenda item of the day, since Dr. Fletcher was not able to attend the last commission meeting where we voted on the new chair and vice chair for this upcoming year, we elected Rosie as vice chair again, and she accepted, and we elected Chip as chair, but he was not available to accept. So our first order of business is Dr. Fletcher, you accept the nomination of chair of the commission as acted upon as the June 15th, 2021 commission meeting for the next year.
I accept. Thank you very much.
Excellent. I hand over the virtual gavel to you, and the rest of the meeting is yours.
Let's all give Dr. Keener a round of thanks for the great job she's done in the past year. Thanks, Vicki. Great work. So we have two sets of minutes to approve. Let's begin with May 17. Anybody have any corrections, edits?
I do. I have one small correction on page, oh, there are no page, no, page 4. On the top, under point number 4, it says chapter 343 on environmental impact statements does not include a greenhouse gas assessment. It should be does include. Just get rid of the word not.
Important difference. Anyone else? So although I wasn't present at the meeting, reading through the minutes generated a question in my mind. Recent news is that the Hawaii Tourism Authority has had a reduction in funding, and the state legislature has, yes, Rosie?
Chip, are you referring to the June minutes or the May minutes? Because I thought, sorry, I just wasn't sure if we were talking about.
I'm referring to the May minutes.
Okay, because you were present at the May meeting. You weren't present at the June meeting, is my recollection.
Okay, thanks for that correction. Anyway, the legislature has given the counties the ability to put to enact a visitor tax, and this was brought up in the May minutes, and I wonder, is that an opportunity for a carbon fee or fee and dividend or carbon tax or something now that the county has? Okay, McKenna's ready with an answer. Yes.
No, my understanding is the authorization is very directed towards the TAT, the tourism, the accommodations tax, the existing accommodations tax, which, so the answer would be no, it wouldn't open the door to a county level carbon tax, in my understanding.
Is this the first recent authority that the counties have been given to tax tourism? I'm not sure. Okay.
I think I'd have to think about that because there are a couple mechanisms, right? Like rental cars or other, yeah.
Right. I just wanted to bring it up because it triggered a question in my mind. A change in tax capacity or authority at the county level may open a door that we want to look into. So no more comments on the May 17th minutes? No more edits, okay. May I hear a motion to accept the minutes, please?
Motion to accept the May minutes.
Second it.
Thank you, Rosie and Vicky. All in favor, please say aye. Raise your hands. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The May 17 minutes are adopted. And moving on to the June 15 minutes, where I was not present. Any edits or corrections here? Alrighty. Hearing none, may I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, McKenna and Rosie. And a vote, please, to accept the June 15th minutes. Aye.
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 Thank you. The minutes are accepted. And agenda item number 5, communication and correspondence from the public. Any comments from the public today?
There was no new correspondence that came in to the commission's email.
Okay, can we open it up at this point for members who are here on the Zoom from the public? So anybody present on the Zoom wish to offer some testimony, make a statement? All right, thank you. Item number 6, activities from the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability and Resiliency. Do we have Director Gonzer with us? Or someone representing the office who wants to give a presentation? Matt
Not
stated-
currently on, but he is on his way.
Okay.
The next couple agenda items are all Matt.
All right, well, how about a climate change update? There was a paper that came out in the last month reporting that already looking at 43 countries, over 1/3 of heat-related deaths are tied to climate change. 1/3 of heat-related deaths have now been tied to climate change in peer-reviewed literature. And I think this opens up the general idea that we do need to be concerned about heat, especially in our urban setting. And we'll be looking for opportunities to bring in some experts on heat stress and heat events such as heat waves to address the commission. And perhaps we'll be able to produce some guidance with regard to the rise in both heat stress and heat events. And we're all aware of what's been going on in the Pacific Northwest. Which has been high pressure center with unusually high temperatures that has settled in from British Columbia down into Northern California.
Did you get a chance to look at the video of the meeting from last month where we had the discussion on kind of areas of interest that CCSR brought up for the next year of commission meetings and discussion topics?
Yeah, I didn't take notes on them though, but I also saw them in the minutes. Heat was in there.
Yep. Yeah.
And apparently the city of Miami has a new heat officer, which I think is the first actual heat officer in the US. And I'm looking into perhaps bringing her in to give a talk at one of our future meetings and see what she is implementing in the way of policies and procedures for Miami.
Something else of note that I know I forwarded this to you, Chip, was that we had that great presentation from Chris Cunningham a couple months back about the FEMA BRIC program, if you all remember that. And they recently did release the funding, and Hawaii was not funded on the FEMA BRIC program for this year. So a lot of those projects are still looking for funding. So we might want to go back and look for other kind of climate and infrastructure type opportunities going forward, other programs that might fill some of those gaps.
Vicki, do you have or can you provide a link to where we can take a look at which projects were funded through the federal BRIC program? I know I can Google it, but I think if you have it.
Yeah, I read an article about it that someone else, some other folks wrote about it, but I can send that, and that links directly to the projects. I think I'll put it in the chat.
As I recall, do you recall the city and county of Honolulu, like what BRIC projects we had been pursuing, not as the city and county, but like within the jurisdiction of the city and county of Honolulu? Did that include, for example, I thought Hau'ula had been looking to get a resilience hub funded. It is my very vague recollection.
Yeah, some of the stats are on that second link that I put in there, the FEMA.gov one. So they received 1,227 sub-applications for over $4 billion in funding. And then the BRIC ones were 991 sub-applications, and then 406 of those were funded. That first article that I sent is about how certain regions were kind of systemically underfunded when you look at what projects were submitted, and Hawaii was one of those regions. Yeah, so Midwestern states, I think, were Midwestern.
Do they file reports when somebody comes to them and they're saying,
So I understand Matt is in the elevator and will be here soon. I've also put a link up to nature.com article. I think it's a commentary on the research paper that I mentioned. A lot of good resources here in the chat. Sorry, Vicki, I think we interrupted.
Oh no, I was just, I'm scrolling down, and so they have this a table in that Headwaters Economics with states with the lowest applications of success for 2020 BRIC funding. And Hawaii did get some, But the percent selected for further review was 0.59%. So it's one of the states with the least selected for review.
And they have heat specific projects that they funded?
I can't find exactly what projects were selected for further review. So Shar, sorry about that. I can't find, I would assume that different projects did receive scoring and evaluations back. And I don't know about the Ha'ula one.
I'm sure everybody remembers it was either the summer of 2019 or 2018. We set hundreds of temperature records, July, August, and September in the state of Hawaii. And our heat events are, at least that one was tied to a marine heat wave where we had a body of very high sea surface temperatures settle in around the Hawaiian Islands and broader, which is fundamentally a different process than the what are known as Rossby waves in the jet stream, big meanders in the jet stream that develop and is responsible for the heat wave that hit the Pacific Northwest. So one is the Pac Northwest is getting hit with an atmospheric process, and our heat event, at least so far, has been a marine oceanographic process. And we know far less about marine heat waves than we do about these atmospheric events. So that's an area of research, marine heat waves, that has a lot of relevance to our community.
And there's a table in the brick that I found with the full applications, and I don't actually see any for Hawaii.
Yeah, there were 7 applications from Hawaii. A couple were actually ineligible. And then the rest were not selected. Actually, one was selected for further review. So 1 of 7 selected for further review, 2 of 7 ineligible, and then the other 4 just not selected. I note that none seem to be specifically on place-based locations on the island of Oahu. There were 2 from the island of Maui, and then a couple of kind of statewide initiatives. So yeah, with regard to kind of looking at specific communities on Oahu, I think that could be a potential area for consideration of expanding.
Chip, it looks like you were talking, so you're on mute.
And while you're researching that, why don't we turn it over to Matt? Matt, you're looking, I thought you'd be out of breath at this point, but of course in an elevator, that's your chance to catch your breath. Thanks for meeting us. Sorry about the busy schedule that brought you here, but we're glad you're here.
And thank you, presumably Chair Fletcher at this point, and my apologies for missing that section of the agenda. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity every meeting to provide some updates from the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. And it sounds like I came in on the tail end of some of the federal BRIC discussions, so I won't belabor that point. But just wanted to start off with some personnel updates. We had shared good news at the last meeting about 2 staff members joining in between last meeting and this meeting. So I'm pleased to reconfirm that as of June the 21st, Ben Sullivan has joined the team as the Energy Program Manager. He comes with a whole wealth of experience, both in design build, in architecture on the island of Kauai, community leadership with the Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, and then most recently, just over a decade as the Energy Program Manager for their Office of Economic Development, working with both Mayors Carvalho and Mayor Kawakami. So we're super excited and pleased that Ben has joined the team as of the 21st. And then as of the 30th, at the end of June, we now have a new office manager, Karan Park Chun, who if you have not yet had the chance to meet, she's on today's call. As you may recall, Win Vong used to be the direct staff to facilitate and administer, support administratively this commission. Haley is obviously on the line today. She'll continue as part of a transition with Karan through at least the August meeting. But then moving forward, Chair and Vice Chair Aligado, you'll continue to work with Karan moving forward. I do want to stay in that lane of federal funding opportunities and share, we did, as what I heard Vice Chair Aligado speaking, the not just local disappointment, but some nationwide disappointment in terms of this first round of building resilient infrastructure in communities, FEMA's new pre-disaster mitigation program. And I imagine they've been hearing a lot from state hazard mitigation officers all across the country. I can share with you that Teresa from Hawaii Emergency Management, who is our hazard mitigation officer, is additionally seeking out guidance and any after action evaluations based on this first round. We had 2 projects moving forward, but 0 projects from Hawaii were selected as part of the competitive funding pool. So there's both a quote unquote set aside, which is a little bit more formulaic in its distribution to the states. Obviously good news on getting important projects through that process, but extremely disappointing on the competitive side, especially considering a lot of these federal opportunities will continue to become competitive, right? A lot of jurisdictions vying for very critical resources. And just for context, a state like Texas, if they had gotten all of what they wanted, that would have been more than the federal funding available. So it really screams to the need and the desire in local communities and the recognition that we want to take proactive measures because we know that the costs are that much greater after the fact if we haven't done things to prepare communities for these potential life safety risks. The other thing that I'm pleased to share, you may have heard that there's a similar process going through Congress in building up to the new federal fiscal year, hopefully come October. Previously referred to as earmarks. The House calls them community project funds. The Senate calls them congressionally directed funds. And we've had good submissions with Senator Schatz. The Senate side is a little bit slower in its process, but I'm pleased to share, at least on the House side, we do have a project in coordination with the Department of Parks and Recreation to develop a city, street, and park tree inventory, elevating its importance as critical city assets and infrastructure. And we received notice that it passed out of its committee. There's obviously many more steps along the way, right? Full House, crossover to the Senate, all the machinations, but I think we're in good process, and hopefully on the tail end of this year, we can share exciting news on that front, along with some of the other project submissions that our local congressional delegation is carrying forward. And then lastly, maybe just to wrap up a project that we haven't spoken about in some time, the Climate Ready Oahu effort, website of the same name, climatereadyoahu.org. That project, we recently went through a contract amendment to bring more resources to that effort and to specifically look at what's referred to as adaptation pathways, or these different triggers or thresholds through time that should inform decision points. And the 2 climate hazards across the 5 that are the primary focus within that strategy that we will be doing include sea level rise and increasing heat, so temperature rise. And the reason we're excited about that is that those 2, through the risk assessment, were identified as the hazards of top concern, primarily because of not just consequence, but also the likelihood, where the science is pretty clear in terms of the direct relationship between sea level rise and increasing temperatures as a result of greenhouse gas pollution. And this also helps sort of distinguish it between some of the other efforts that already exist within the hazard mitigation plan. So more updates coming on that front. We're currently working on some community island-wide polling to share out more on the direct hazard information to get more sentiment across community in terms of awareness and appetite for potential strategies to address those hazards. So be on the lookout. You may be one of the 700 plus lucky recipients of some engagement from our folks at SMS. And then lastly, just wanted to highlight that, along with you all, I think we're still a bit starving for some in-person direct engagements. And this project team in particular has restarted those efforts by going to a variety of community events, most recently at the Pearl Ridge Farmers Market. And then we have a whole series already, about 7 or 8 other scheduled activities around the island to sort of ramp up and re-engage around this particular effort, which we know is sort of both sides of addressing climate change. First and foremost, climate action to reduce and eliminate the direct driver of climate change, and then to continue to prepare community, not just prepare for the worst, but engage in the earnest discussions on what are the opportunities to improve environmental and community conditions through time in the face of climate change. So I'll pause there and happy to field any questions. And maybe as you're thinking, the next few scheduled activities include if you're at the Kailua Farmers Market this Thursday, or if you're at Waimea Valley on Sunday for La Ohana Day, or there is a Hawaii Youth Climate Coalition talk story at the end of the month on Saturday the 31st down at Kaka'ako Waterfront Park. Other upcoming engagements into August include the State Art Museum, the Bishop Museum, Mililani, the zoo, Hau'ula, and working on solidifying more plans with more partners in other communities.
Is your schedule published online someplace?
Hopefully at the Climate Ready Oahu participate page. If that information is not updated yet, that would be the best location to find that information, or follow along with our office on social media to get the skinny.
Okay, and we have a question from Amanda Ellis.
Thanks so much, everybody. Great to hear the plan, Matt. Just wanted to ask, given the very laudable aims of both reducing the potential causes of climate change and preparing for disaster, you and I have had discussions in the past that schools could benefit from having solar and batteries, both to equip them better, but also in the case of disaster, we know that the schools are not well equipped currently, and just wondering what there might be in the plan to address that issue, given the likelihood at some stage of an extreme weather event and the underpreparedness that we know is the case for the schools as shelters.
Yeah, thanks for that great question, Amanda. And there's a lot of ways we could respond to that question. One of the more exciting ones is what Mark Want put in the chat, which is one of those brick projects that we referred to. So this is the concept of microgridding, where the school itself is an identified shelter, but those shelters can only function if they're a little bit more self-sufficient during moments of crisis. So that concept of battery backup with a facility that has an existing PV array and PV system is one of those things that we're pleased to partner with the DOE to get the funding, and could certainly, hopefully, serve as a model moving forward. But then concurrently, there's this other effort through more FEMA funds that we secured at the start of this year to work with both KCC and UH Manoa's Department of Urban and Regional Planning on direct community engagement towards this concept of resilience hubs. These hubs really hopefully never have to perform in moments of crisis, but certainly should, at minimum, serve as safe spaces. But what are the other things that make them community assets and community resources 364 and a half days of the year? Either these could be existing structures that need some love and attention, or in other locations we might need to explore the establishment of new structures. So sort of a whole suite of concurrent efforts going on right now. Thank you, Amanda.
Okay, thank you. So does that complete the report from the office, Matt?
Does indeed. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. And you're up for the next one as well. You've asked for an update on the city's climate action plan. And we have an open schedule, an open agenda today. This is really the major and only large item on the agenda. So Matt, would you like to run through your presentation to the end, or would you mind if we sort of have a dialogue on the way, interrupt you now and then with questions? What's your preference?
Open to conversation throughout the sharing.
And actually, Courtney, can you give me some guidance? If the public has a question along the way, can we allow them in with their questions like I just did with Amanda, and not have to cycle through the commission and then go to the public? What's your preference, Courtney?
I defer to the commission's inclination on that. I think the appropriate thing would be to follow the agenda, but if the commission wishes to take a break from the agenda and everybody is in agreement to do so, then that's commission's decision to make.
Okay, that's a little different than what I asked, but anyway, we'll move on to the presentation at this point. So Matt, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to share back more detail on the climate action plan. You know, last meeting we were pleased to share that at the June 2nd City Council meeting, the city officially adopted our first ever climate action plan. And hopefully, you know, this is a bit conversational. There's been a lot of communications and efforts underway, and a lot of joint and community efforts to get us to this point to begin with. But first and foremost, want to thank the community for contributions over the last 2.5 years to get to this. We'll need continued collaboration, especially as we now get into implementation and execution of the adopted plan. Thank you to the stakeholders. We'll share out here. We had a stakeholder advisory group of sorts, or sorry, I should say more of a working group, a technical working group, in conjunction with our support and the research team identified here on the cover, both from UH's Economic Research Organization and the Institute for Sustainability and Resilience. So obviously the point of climate action is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This plan, as shown here, looks at the years 2020 to 2025, and we'll explain why, and primarily keys in on 3 sectors of our greenhouse gas emissions, including energy and buildings, transportation and land use, and the waste sectors. You may recall at the end of last year, Ordinance 20-47, in addition to detailing more specific programmatic work for the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency, established 2 additional policies. One that this commission commented on, which was the One Water for Climate Adaptation policy, but then also ensuring that the city is committed to climate action towards the backstop of 2045, consistent with state law, but not to necessarily start the planning process all the way towards those latter years. We know that there's a lot of even since the adoption in June, there's been a lot of market changes and processes at the Public Utilities Commission, more research just yesterday in terms of different pathways and scenarios regarding electric vehicle adoption. So this is, a rapidly evolving field, which really drives home the point of looking at a near-term action plan with that longer-term horizon. And then this also puts us in line with the city's commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement, which the US is now officially back in, and there's a lot of work getting ready for the COP the Council, the Party of Parties in Glasgow later this year, and City Council Resolution 21-105. And the other good thing to highlight is that we know that decarbonizing our economy has many benefits. There's the most immediate reason to do it because it is the direct source of the changes that we've already measured here locally that have impacted communities and impacted our natural and cultural resources, and that we see continue to have grave and dire consequences for people in place all around the globe. But there's a lot of quality of life and health benefits and other economic benefits from taking these measures, whether it's providing more safe and accessible options for moving about community, targeting growth and facilitating people's access to transit, which then also facilitates saving open spaces and being able to do important conservation and restoration work. But then also, especially in these times, thinking about both economic stabilization, recovery, and even transformation to facilitate and to support reinvesting in our community and in reinvesting in our people here locally. Oh, excuse me. And as part of the process, in addition to direct in-person engagements as far back as late 2018, we had some additional island-wide community polling and surveys that went out throughout different stages of the process. And it really drives home the point that community supports and expects action, right? Every year there were measures pointing towards the development of climate action. Certainly there's been progress in different areas along the way, but having this focused, intentional, agreed upon path forward is really exciting and encouraging and sets the expectation about what we can and should be working on. So certainly this, statewide and on this island, really a testament to the voters even establishing the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. More than 80% of residents at that point in time believe climate change is a serious issue today. And I can vouch, I was on a Hawaii Chamber of Commerce and Hawaii Energy panel with Mayor and DPP Director Dean Uchida just last week, and there was a similar polling question, and the respondents of nearly 100 participants across various industries were like, we are concerned about it today, and we think about energy and electric costs in decisions for our businesses. So that was validating and reinforced, I think, the sentiment that we generally see out there. Similarly, people are interested, especially through COVID, as opportunities and options were a bit more local right outside your door. There's continued growth and support for having a mix of places and resources and amenities within your sphere, right, within your realm and your community, which sort of makes sense and is consistent with the other kinds of planning, community plans, transit-oriented development planning that's been going on for more than a decade at this point. Similarly, people expressed interest in having like buildings track and measure their performance across and against similar like buildings, whether it's commercial, residential, or other types of facilities, because that information is then empowering to any tenant or operators or owners about ways to find opportunities to bring those costs down and not waste money on wasted energy, but reinvest, again, finding opportunities and being empowered with information to reinvest within our own operations and within our community. And then lastly, one other highlight is even if it were to affect on-street parking or affect how we allocate public space within the road right-of-way, there was a more than 2-to-1 support for things like dedicated bus lanes and supporting and facilitating more focus on dedicated transit routes.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you have a question, Chip?
Yeah, thanks. On the issue of buildings, are there any current plans for retrofitting our building stock at the city level?
Yeah, I can share some more updates a couple of slides from now, but that's one of the specific actions within the climate action plan. Having, the city, certainly we want to walk the walk and lead by example and look across our assets all around the island. So I can share more on that, Chip.
Thank you.
Just to drive home, the climate action plan has been something that's been underway for several years at this point. We worked with council members, University of Hawaii, HPU, Chamber of Commerce to have these in-person activities within the first phase, which helped talk about these different time horizons and what it may take and what work needs to be done and set up at different points to get the benefits and start accruing those savings over time. Similarly, as I mentioned, we did some island-wide polling. We had to pivot at the start of the pandemic. Obviously, we were slated to do a whole nother round of 14 island-wide climate change open houses, quickly worked with the team and with UH to find more and different ways to bring more voices into the conversation. And in addition to interdepartmental working groups and agreement, we had this technical working group, which is listed in the climate action plan itself. And really, the engagement doesn't stop with the adoption of the plan. All of these things require more work, right? So there will be continued and ongoing discussions with industries, community members, leaders, et cetera, to think about the implementation and the execution and making sure that we're leading with equity first and foremost as one of the guiding elements. There's a whole suite of questions that we asked of each of the strategies, and we really want to make sure that we're bringing benefit to those that have perhaps not received benefit before or not been able to access the kinds of things that support clean energy transformation. And here's sort of the main performance metric, right? This is how we measure whether or not we are succeeding. You can see some good success from the benchmark year of 2005. Certainly a lot of progress through the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative and keying in on the electricity sector and the grid itself. But then we were sort of stagnant through the 2010s and most recently through 2017, 18, and 19 have seen a growth in our emissions, which is charting us in the wrong direction relative to the kinds of things that we need to do. And also wanted to share, as we observe and communicate with jurisdictions all around the country, we've seen successful jurisdictions that are both reducing their emissions as well as growing their economies and growing their populations. So this notion that climate action might affect the other kinds of things that community is dependent upon is proving not to be true. And I think that's a good reminder that we already export so much resource to import foreign fossil fuel sources that we're just going to have to then adapt more and more and find more and more resources to do things like climate change adaptation. Obviously, we don't have the 2020 numbers here. There's a bit of a lag in accessing the information. I think it'll be a real interesting story to see both the 2020 bar chart as well as the 2021 bar chart, as there's been some rapid return of both air travel and the visitor industry. But again, this is something that we have the methodology and we measure annually and we produce and put out in the annual sustainability report, and really is one of the main metrics to measure success of the climate action plan. And here you can see the 9 overarching strategies that I mentioned within those sectors that really the city has the most immediate and direct influence and leverage over, which include transportation and land use, buildings and energy, or the electricity used within those structures, and then waste management, both on solid waste as well as wastewater management. And I'll maybe pause here for folks to review the 9 strategies themselves, but as we move on, I'll key in on some action highlights to show things that are either underway or sort of share the breadth of things that are, investments, projects, policies, programmatic efforts, the full suite of things within the Climate Action Plan. I see your hand, Chip.
Matt, we have a question in the chat. Are there requirements for new construction to be LEED certified or at least include energy efficiency currently?
So the plan itself doesn't define any of those things. Any of those kinds of sentiments would have to come through the public process of adopting either a new ordinance or continuing to progress with our various codes. In city charter, public buildings, we have a standard that we're supposed to design towards, again, to lead by example. But the Climate Action Plan itself, its adoption by resolution, doesn't immediately trigger or do the work of implementing the actions. All of those things themselves either are budget decisions, programmatic initiatives and efforts, or need to become other bill and ordinance processes.
Any questions from commissioners?
I have one quick question, Matt, on strategy number 7, the expand renewable energy planning and expedite permitting. Is the permitting, the expediting permitting specifically about renewable energy projects?
Yes, so the and is related to those things, not just grid projects, which we know expediting can sometimes bring concern for people, certainly in community all across the island. But there's other elements within that strategy, specific actions that are also looking at streamlining processes for getting more rooftop and battery systems accessible for more people that perhaps haven't been able to tap into those kinds of programs. But things like multi-tenant, townhome, multifamily, commercial facilities continue to be a challenge because of different meters and different really important life safety concerns that we can't gloss over, but we need to be able to facilitate and work through the process so that we can get more things on more roofs.
I guess my question is more, would that be like a preferential permitting for renewable energy?
No, it's not about sort of cutting in line or bumping other kinds of permits. It's about a process specific for those kinds of applications. Yeah, we don't want to, expedite one thing at the detriment of other important investments.
I have a question too. Matt, you mentioned that the city wants to walk the walk and lead by setting examples earlier in your presentation, and I love that. I love seeing the examples where citizens say, citizens call for action and have examples of what they're willing to do, which is wonderful. I'm wondering about I'm wondering whether you have a feel for the appetite for change in the various city departments. The city and us here within this group might be quick to say, this is what we need to do, this is what we like to do, and identify areas of potential change. But in how far has this, and maybe even this climate action plan, been embraced by other city departments? Do you have a feel for that yet?
I'm happy to sort of advance talking points from later stages, but Mayor launched the Climate Action Plan on Earth Day. Was a very appropriate time and an exciting moment. We've, since the adoption, we've had agency-wide implementation kickoff. We've had one-on-one discussions with the lead departments identified across the 47 actions. And really at this point, it's about how to drive it and accelerate it all moving forward. There's agreement and excitement across the opportunities, especially on the things that can improve our own city operations, as well as streamlining and aligning our budget to prioritize and align with these values and these commitments. So, to that point, the coalition is there, and Mayor is really driving action and implementation and keeping the emphasis and focus on the benefits to people. As much as this can be sort of high level thinking, reducing emissions can be cost saving, they can be cost effective, they can create better equitable outcomes, they can improve other kinds of outcomes like reducing traffic, increasing efficiencies, improving quality of life, health, all of the above. So I think there's a lot of growing awareness of departments seeing themselves within this plan, because it was not our plan. This was a citywide effort in conjunction with them all. And whether it's the general plan, the sustainable communities plans, our transit-oriented development, our recently drafted first ever pedestrian plan, all these things that are about providing the benefits to people are squarely also climate action measures.
That's really wonderful to hear. You know why I'm asking this question, and thank you for answering it.
Sure. And apologies, I keep saying departments, administration, city council, through their resolution of adopting the plan, demonstrated their commitment and their agreement on the importance and need to carry forward with the actions identified too. So when both the administration and the council on board, we can collectively say the city's plan. Okay. Barring any additional questions, I'll just keep moving us along here. And as an example, within the ground transportation strategy, or the suite of strategies that account for the ground transportation focus, again, you can see that some of them are more like land use and how we develop or don't develop around the island, supporting and facilitating different modes. I mentioned that recent story and study coming out of the university regarding different scenarios for EV, and perhaps those being even more important than we might have known before. Similarly, with a new state law, electric scooter companies are chomping at the bit to bring more options to facilitate people moving around the island or around certain parts of the island outside of a vehicle, which we know take up a lot of space, and there are a lot of efficiencies that can be gained through multimodal options, whether it's walking, biking, or scooters or others. How do we shift and support and potentially even save money through different parking regimes, and not being the ones that establish the rules for what minimum amount of parking needs to be created? That's a law that passed at the end of last year. Exciting to see some projects move forward that wouldn't have been able to unless that law had changed at the end of last year. And then also looking at our own city fleet, perhaps at a subsequent meeting, once that first analysis is completed, we can share some of the outputs from an investigation that we've been doing at looking at our own city fleet. Especially, I think, while it's done the good work of looking towards this 2035 time horizon, there's probably much more that can and should be done to think about right-sizing our fleet and recognizing that potentially we have more vehicles than are needed for the various kinds of things that we do. So the action highlights here, action 3.1 is an example of something that was being worked on before the plan was adopted. And actually, as I mentioned at the end of last year, a new ordinance was passed. So we didn't necessarily need to wait to do the things that we knew were right. So there are a few elements of the climate action plan that are already completed or see significant progress and just need to be supported on the enforcement and compliance. And then something like 2.4 doesn't immediately fit within any department per se. And planting trees for some viewers might sound more like a climate adaptation measure to support, managing heat and rainfall. The sort of carbon sequestration is probably small relative to the other benefits that can be gained through just reducing emissions. But this is the kind of thing that's more about quality of life, right? And you're setting the conditions that then encourage and even invite people to move about their community in different modes, which goes towards some of the other land use and development patterns. And then on the building and energy side, really sort of in the same spirit as the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative, we know the best thing to do is efficiency first, right? Just reduce your demand, which then changes what amount or kinds of energy you might need in the future. So certainly looking for efficiencies as well as thinking about what gets built anew or retrofitted. Chip, you mentioned what is the city doing across our own operations. We have one energy service performance contract that's well underway. We have a second one specifically for the Department of Parks and Recreation that we hope to be getting into the negotiated agreement to get the work underway, hopefully within this year. And then we're looking also at Department of Environmental Services across their facilities, a similar model where you can partner with the private industry, capitalize on their direct upfront investment, and then pay back those investments over time, the performance period, through the savings that you accrue. So for that citywide one that's currently in phase 1, looking at 10 of our largest facilities around the island, we anticipate upwards of $2 million in annual savings, and then net savings at the end of the 20-year performance period. And again, that affords us the opportunity to just keep reinvesting. I think maintenance of systems gets a short shrift in terms of thinking about city operations. So this is a great example of how to recoup those savings and keep that money flowing within the local economy. And maybe I'll just pause here instead of trying to go through each specific action to see if there's any questions on this slide. Hearing none, we can always come back. And then the last sector, looking at waste across, as I mentioned, both solid waste or refuse and wastewater management. Managing these systems themselves can produce different forms of greenhouse gas emissions, and oftentimes that's a resource that could be recaptured and utilized either on site or by some off-taker for some other benefit. So we want to make sure, even though this is, if you recall back at the bar chart, a very small sliver of our greenhouse gas emissions, we don't want to lose sight of where the city has direct influence or diminish the need and the opportunity to work across all categories. And then, as I mentioned, climate action has been underway already. Certainly governments and industries or any entity really wants to look at its own opportunities for efficiency, benefits to its employees. Just some snapshots of things that were underway or recently completed. Not only have we received several electric buses and have about 17 either in development or soon to be en route to Oahu, that big pit in the upper left-hand corner is an image that doesn't quite look like that anymore because the chargers have been installed. So we now have these systems and facilities out at the Kalihi Transit Center, looking at the Alapa'i Transit Center, as well as some of the locations out leeward to make sure that we can build out this network. We're also pleased to share that there's been a lot of interest from Senator Schatz's office on e-bus and the charging system specifically, as well as potential support for more public-facing chargers at city facilities island-wide. The solar array is an example from the Board of Water Supply, which I can see right outside my window. We actually learned from them in terms of the energy savings performance contract that they successfully executed and have been likewise collecting the revenues to pay that off over the performance period, but also finding opportunities to reinvest in their efficiencies around the island. And then as you can see here, things like parking reform, a lot of great data about overparked areas, and we don't want to be in the business of driving or obligating the development of things that potentially could be better served for other purposes, like housing for people versus storage for cars, and then finding ways to support multi-modes and prioritize transit for those users. And as I mentioned, we will continue to use the annual sustainability report to track progress, not just on climate action, but on a whole variety of other measures and indicators. But it's really within that climate action section where hopefully we continue to see green and renewable energy. Hopefully we start to see at least gray to green on the carbon emissions side, and then finding ways to better define and measure progress in terms of equity, access, and affordability. And coming to conclusion here, yes, the plan has been adopted and the actions are identified and articulated, but really now thinking about how we implement these efforts. What are the guiding principles? And these surface through the process and engagement with community members around the island, really building capacity across departments. That goes to Commissioner Maynard's question of working with departments. We are the lead on a few of the actions, but we certainly continue to serve a coordination and facilitation role, trying to bring resources and research or technical support and or community engagement to advance any of the actions. Following in line with Mayor's roadmap to recovery and other leadership from the federal level, really focusing in and keying in on environmental and economic justice through implementation. And that's part and parcel with continued and ongoing community engagement towards advancing any of the actions, let alone just sort of resting on the laurels of the adoption of the plan. We know it doesn't matter unless we do the things. And as I mentioned again, Mayor is really keen on that. He shared at Earth Day, adopting plans is one thing, but it's really about what you do in the days and weeks and months moving forward. And then to that point of reporting out on progress, we fortunately have good systems to continue to communicate with the community, city council, and others to be open and transparent and accountable to the kinds of goals and commitments that we've made. And lastly, again, just sharing some of Mayor's sentiment as expressed at the State of the City. Decarbonizing our economy is really just good business. It's an opportunity to not only reduce our pollution and contributions, but accelerate our current economic recovery and transformation, bringing more benefit to more people, supporting transformation and job training opportunities, specifically in these sectors, improving city efficiencies, maximizing our partnerships and funding opportunities. But it's also about lowering long-term risk as we continue to have to report to rating agencies on not just our awareness of the challenges, but what we're doing about it, and certainly taking steps on climate action, taking to heart the guidance that the Commission provided in terms of climate change and financial risk is really important to keep those resources on island and keep them circulating for the benefit of our community members. And then also a little bit of friendly co-opetition across jurisdictions. Rankings are nice, and sometimes they're the motivator for some people. And I think if we are able to both maintain some of our rankings around per capita rooftop PV and per capita electric vehicles on the roadway, that's not just a thing to get a blue ribbon for, but that means we're actually bringing more benefit to more people and providing ways to reduce cost burdens for community members island-wide. So with that, just wanted to say thank you for the time this morning, and happy to go back to any portions of the slide materials, and then ultimately we'll post this document online as well.
Thank you, Matt. fantastic and a great document. Commissioners, any questions? So Matt, I have a question. Globally, from production to consumption, the food chain, the food system is variously responsible for roughly a third, 26 to 34% of greenhouse gas emissions. Does food, I guess I don't see food in here as a specific category, and I don't, my question is where does managing our food resources, where our food comes from, play a role in the climate action plan?
Good question, Chip. The two most direct responses to that are, as I explained at the start, we wanted to focus in on the areas where the city in this most immediate near term had direct influence and leverage over, which is why we keyed in on those sectors of land use, transportation, buildings and energy, and waste. So those other categories within the greenhouse gas inventory, of which food, agricultural, forestry, and other land uses is a component, is important. The specific actions related to food management are more about the waste management, where we don't want to unnecessarily dump good things that could benefit different members of the community or find ways to partner with resource management. So it's really about ensuring that we're not wasting the food that we have, which then triggers and forces more processing that drives emissions. But to your point of the continued importation of food, that really falls within the marine or air transportation sector, where this isn't a full, McKenna, please save me because I'm going to forget some of the technical terms here. There are different ways that you can conduct inventories. This methodology is based on a community standard, which doesn't necessarily account for the, I don't know, it's full life cycle perhaps is the incorrect term, but for the emissions that are generated in other locations for things that you're also accessing and benefiting from. That is something that potentially we could look into in subsequent climate action plans, and it's stated as such, I think, in this action plan, or at least if anyone's interested, at the website, you can actually see the full suite of comments that were received during the open comment period from late December through mid-February, where direct responses were provided. And I'll ask Haley can drop the project website in the chat. We know it's important, but for this first attempt, we're really focusing in on those that we have the most direct influence over. And candidly, there's another section in there that says it's not enough and we need to do more. And there are certain things that we will need to continue to advocate up, partner with state and federal government, because some of the sectors we just cannot influence directly, including at least the fuel sources in transportation for marine and air travel, and then some of the other things around vehicle efficiency, et cetera. So I think what you're referring to are direct emissions, whereas we're looking at the emissions generated within our jurisdiction.
Right, which brings up another issue. But McKenna, did you want to jump in and add to that?
Oh, no, Matt, you said it well, right? So the city, their annual sustainability report, you'll see they chose to do their inventory on a production-based inventory, which is an in-jurisdiction sort of where emissions are emitted. I'll comment that that's really, really standard as the starting point, right? It's following the GPC protocol, which is kind of the standard for community-based greenhouse gas inventories. That doesn't mean it doesn't have shortcomings. And I think what you highlighted, Chip, is one of the shortcomings. And so that could be, you know, an area for the city to push later. It's a place that other cities have pushed, but the data requirements of it are just simply much harder.
So related to food, of course, is the planetary crisis on biodiversity loss. We have massive tropical deforestation going on, and roughly half of that is driven by an appetite for beef. And we are so limited at our jurisdiction in terms of managing.
The conference.
Someone has their.
Yeah. What is it?
So, yeah, there we go. We're so limited at our jurisdiction in terms of managing some of these aspects of climate change. For instance, it would be nice to look at unsustainably produced beef in the same way we look at tobacco products, right? Bad for individual as well as global health. And yet at the city level, we're very limited in what we can do there. I would just speculate that I think some sort of tax on beef that is produced as a result of deforestation and poor land use practices is something that we should discourage from a government point of view, and perhaps that would be through taxation, the same way that we do with tobacco products. So that's just one example of where the food system is threatening the entire state of Hawaii, certainly threatening our island, because it is cutting the capacity of tropical rainforests to draw down carbon dioxide, as well as it's leading to greater releases of carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases. Again, largely related to food production. So thanks for your comments, Matt. Another area of concern is sequestration. Right, we hear a lot about adaptation, we hear a lot about mitigation, cutting greenhouse gas emissions, but the rise of carbon dioxide equivalent in the atmosphere, even during the pandemic, did not slow down. Emissions decreased roughly 7% over 2020 because of the pandemic and the recession. But the actual in-air accumulation of greenhouse gases continue to accelerate. So sequestration is sort of the ignored third pillar of managing this problem of climate change. And Matt, would you just comment, do you encounter discussions with regard to how the city and county can engage in meaningful sequestration?
Yeah, no, great question, Chip. And there is an explicit discussion point on that within the climate action plan, the long form climate action plan, which says that, yes, it should be and can be part of future discussions. Again, this first attempt at the climate action plan looked at these sectors in particular. We know that there's growing importance and growing opportunity through restoration efforts on this island, Malca conservation, removal of invasives, fencing, et cetera. Things that we know are good for other reasons, but also could potentially start to contribute to the calculation of accounting for reductions or accounting for elimination of carbon dioxide. We participate on the state's greenhouse gas sequestration task force. That's perhaps one of our most direct contributions to the statewide discussion. I would share that when we were doing these island-wide phase 1 community engagements, when we got towards the later 8 years, we looked at the years 2025, 2035, and 2045 to play out scenarios. You're putting down cards for different kinds of ways to eliminate emissions. Eventually, we eliminated them from sectors towards the latter stage, and we were left with sequestration cards. And frankly, a lot of community members didn't like that. Not because they didn't think it's important and they didn't think doing that kind of land management isn't important, but they they knew it could contribute, but they didn't want sort of like a cop out, because then it didn't feel like we were eliminating our emissions, which, you know, pros and cons on those approaches. And I think over time that stuff will become more important, but certainly on the sequestration side, you're not going to get those benefits unless you're doing those improvements today, right? It takes time for either the soils or the woody systems within the vegetation to get to the size where it matters. Just sharing here in conclusion on that thought, Chip, that it's not that we ignored it, it just isn't part of the most immediate and direct opportunity and calculus to prove and demonstrate emissions reduction produced within this island in the near term. But we've
Thanks,
gotten pushback from community members around the island, because I think more and more people are seeing the linkages between economic stabilization, investments in agriculture, continued improvements in green jobs, conservation and restoration. It's just not the forefront of this climate action plan, but those are also efforts that we're working on in other means, and also in conjunction with the state. And you know, don't want to hide that, but just want to be clear that we know it's important, and we're also working on it through different efforts.
Thanks, Matt. Commissioner Maynard, and then we'll go to Charlotte, a member of the public who has a question. Bettina?
Too, Chip.
I'm excited to hear about the sequestration efforts. There are some low-hanging fruits that where the construction industry can contribute in a tremendous capacity, and that is using carbon sequestering concrete for all of the concrete work. Concrete in Hawaii is used to a larger degree than anywhere else, because it is it can be manufactured here, and it is you know, it doesn't have the transportation costs that something like steel has. There, I'm grossly oversimplifying this, but that is the bottom line. We have tremendous construction going on. Concrete is used for vertical as well as horizontal construction. It is a very low-hanging fruit to say the city leads by example, and therefore encourages, or maybe more than encourages, maybe demands the use of carbon sequestering concrete. There are now 3 concrete producers in the islands that are able to produce that concrete, and I would like to suggest that we seriously think about saying any department that is using that is impacting construction should not use anything else but green concrete. A suggestion.
Yeah, thank you, Bettina. There was a resolution sort of urging, you know, this is a couple of years ago at this point, urging the administration to investigate and use the term that is in the resolution is carbon mineralization concrete. Yeah. So it's less proprietary and it's more about the inputs and the outputs, and that yeah. I'd be open to sitting in on a commission meeting where there were people there to talk about it.
That would be fantastic. And the that resolution initially suggested, okay, using this type of concrete on all applicable projects, but then it was a bit watered down, excuse this bad term, but watered down by using the word recommend, I believe. So it lost all its teeth, but the attempt to do something was there, and I do appreciate that.
Thank you, Bettina. Let's go to Commissioner Keener next.
Thanks, Chip, and thanks, Matt, for that overview. I had two quick, or a question and a comment. The comment first is that my research group is also working on kind of metrics around tracking equity, access, environmental justice in terms of more adaptation projects. But as we develop those, if you guys want to kind of contribute to the brain trust and benefit from some of what we come up with, we invite you guys to work with us on that and know that we're working on it. And then the second question I had was really more about, you're talking about implementation a lot in the CAP. And so I guess my question is more from a practical commission standpoint. A lot of the questions, so there are these very high level goals laid out. And the next thing that you were talking about is really like how to get to implementation and get to very specifics on how to accomplish these. Are there ways, or is there a priority you think that the commission could contribute to with guidance on implementation in any of those areas, a way that you see us fitting into that?
Yeah, great question, Victoria. The work is really ahead of us, right, in terms of carrying forward any of these elements. Each action is a work plan in and of itself. While we're doing we've had one-on-one discussions. We had the launch with mayor, managing director, and all the city agencies at the start. A week after the plan was adopted, we've now had one-on-one workshops with half of the lead agencies, more coming up. And I think as we start now pulling out priorities and opportunities, as well as questions and concerns and capacity questions as well, we might have more opportunities moving forward. I don't have sort of like the punch list of what's the package of things that are coming forward at this point in time. There's discussions about both just executing our current FY22, but how do we also align and prepare for the preparation of a fiscal year 23 budget, which even though we just started fiscal year 21 at the start of this month, it's never too soon to put your money where your mouth is and start thinking about demonstrating your values through a subsequent budget. So I know that doesn't directly answer or invite sort of an ask or a task for the commission, but I'll certainly keep that in mind and come forward with those.
Thank you, Charlotte Poe.
Aloha, thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak and ask some questions. And mahalo, Matt, for sharing today.
Did you have a question?
I think we may have lost you there.
Yeah, Charlotte.
At the very lowest level impacts, right? So when we're talking about conversions from reducing reliance on fossil fuels, and I'm going to speak specifically to gas-fueled vehicles to electric vehicles, right? Have there been or are there discussions across the departments and with your other collaborators or collective conversations on plans and programs in place to assist with that transition and potentially what a timeline might look like for individuals and families? Now I'm from the West Side, so I'm speaking specifically to my community or for my community because I'm very familiar with it. We have high use of a labor force that drives off the coast, right? And the majority, I just look at my neighborhood, have gas vehicles. There are families that are not necessarily in a position to replace those with electric vehicles, much less many of them cannot afford it. So we get into the fiscal burden for families to even just install panels that might help to alleviate the costs on electricity for that. So that's one of those questions I have. Two is as we transition or hopefully transition to less gas-fueled vehicles or carbon or fossil fuel reliance, what are the disposal and waste plans for those? Because as we know, we just have so many vehicles right now just dumped on the side of the roads, right? So that's another question on those. And then when it comes to increasing our renewable energy projects, right? And that was my question earlier about the requirements. And I'm glad I appreciated your response because it gives community and the neighborhood boards, especially who are working collaboratively on what to aim for in the next legislative sessions. Yeah, on that as well. I've been asking for a little while, where are the waste management plans for batteries or, windmills that are coming down or solar projects as well? So I'm sorry, those were a few questions, but that's what I've been thinking about. And I come with a perspective and from the lens of my community and hope that from our micro level, it helps to really bring robust solutions that are makavalu to the higher level plans as well. So mahalo for giving me the time.
Yeah, thank you, Shar. Chair in your own right there at the YNI Neighborhood Board. But, some of the answers to your questions are specific actions within the Climate Action Plan. Starting first with the question even just on the waste management side, that's something that our Department of Environmental Services is looking at in earnest in terms of the material management of PV panels at the end of their life, and how do we think through both managing them here directly, or what are the responsibilities for even the providers of any of these kinds of equipment to think about the end of life. So that's something that's very important and exciting, especially here in an island setting, to not just feel like the burden is on us, but there are also, ways to do second life, way to extend different future users, or, the materials themselves are, not to oversimplify what a photovoltaic panel is, but it's some glass and some metal. So how do we think about ways, Chair Kaufman or McKenna's laughing at me because I did oversimplify it, but there are elements in there that can be repurposed, or thinking about the waste management. Waste is just something that we haven't figured out how to reuse, so we need to keep pursuing that. There were a lot of questions around EVs, providing benefit to either geographies or jurisdictions, or those that could potentially even benefit from them sooner and more than others. Part of that relates to how do we ensure that there's more of a support network distributed around the island, or facilitating bringing retrofits to communities. That concept of a solarize, one of the actions that I shared before, solarize Oahu or solarize Waianae or solarize name your community, is really about how do we bring tools and resources and potential ways to hui up shared resources to bring down the costs through some bulk purchasing potentially. There's been success in other jurisdictions and even here locally across the state and in Kekaha on Kauai. On the manufacturing side, industry is moving towards electric vehicle across their entirety of fleets and the kinds of things that they sell and produce, including larger vehicles, trucks, etc. They're moving in this direction fast because not only are they cheaper to own, operate, and maintain, they're cleaner, they're quieter. In a lot of instances, they're quite powerful and punchy. But I don't want, as someone who doesn't have a vehicle, there's a lot of places where we could have the same number of vehicles and still just be sitting in cleaner traffic than what we have currently today, which is why ensuring that there's more options for people in other areas so that it frees up those that perhaps can't immediately tie into either the future rail system or the supporting bus transit system. That didn't answer all of your questions, Shar, but certainly it gets to the component of implementation, right? Bringing the support through any of the actions in places that need it the most and first, so that we're supporting equity through the implementation while still ensuring that the emissions reductions are met in the long term.
Thank you, Matt. Chair Alligato or Commissioner Alligato.
Thanks. I have a question that might possibly be outside the scope of this report, but in kind of reading through and kind of thinking about, you know, the potential for job creation in climate adaptation, I just wanted to again bring up the point. I know we've talked about this before, but my concern really being how we make these entry-level jobs more competitive in terms of salaries. Um, I'm just worried. I know as many others are about privileging those who have the ability to kind of get their training early on in their career versus those who really need the money to have financial independence. So I just in reading this report, I just wanted to kind of bring that up because I know Commissioner Keener and I have really been thinking about that a lot in the equity report and in many other spheres. So just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. And while not explicitly discussed in the Climate Action Plan, that's been a lot of the effort through the CARES funding last year and now preparing for the American Rescue Plan efforts. This workforce development, we are even against a wall internally in the city where people are going through programs. They're the people that we want to keep investing in, but because of outdated either minimum qualifications or descriptions within our own DHR systems, we're a hindrance to ourselves. And I imagine through other apprenticeship opportunities and working with, we have a good partnership right now with Local 5 and the Carpentry Union to create these pathways through some workforce development, Work Hawaii, and UH partnerships. So we want to make sure that we're carrying forward all of that so that at the end, we're not in our own way in terms of facilitating and supporting getting people into positions, whether it's construction trades or sort of like quote unquote green jobs, back literally in the green, like behind you, Vice Chair, right? Like the actual natural resource management that can provide direct benefit for climate change adaptation, either through nonprofit work, state work, or even things like city stormwater management or urban forestry programs, right? We need to find all of the above options and make it exciting and appealing to become perhaps a public employee, which candidly is sometimes an uphill climb because of the competitiveness with the labor sector.
Okay, great discussion. Thank you. I'm keeping an eye on the time. Matt, that was wonderful. Thanks so much. There's so much more we could keep talking about, and let's continue to keep our eye on the climate action plan in future meetings as a topic to continue to discuss and emphasize. So the next agenda item is public input for matters not on the agenda. Do we have any comments from the public? All right. Commissioners, any comments or thoughts?
I just wanted to remind the public that the public is urged to report stormwater concerns like flooding, drainage, or stream issues to the city. They have been having virtual meetings, and there are 2 online surveys that are open until July 16th. I'm going to put the link in the chat right now. That's all I have to say.
Great. Thank you, Rosie. And tentative next meeting date. Let me repost these dates in the chat for the commissioners. Haley, where are we in sending out a meeting scheduler?
Going to send it out right after this so as not to confuse people between the meetings. But currently, the next meeting is tentatively scheduled for the 30th, I believe. But given some potential upcoming meeting agendas for the next meeting, we're looking to find a new date and time that'll accommodate for some speakers. So Chip dropped in some additional dates, all at the 9 to 11 time frame. So I'll follow up with the commissioners to see if we can lock one of those dates down.
Thanks, Haley. So this would either replace the August 31st meeting with one on the 12th, the 25th, or the 26th, or potentially set our September meeting for September 16th or 26th. And the idea is to bring in Scott Glenn, the energy CEO for the state. And it's also an opportunity, I guess, for Ben Sullivan, our energy expert with the city office, perhaps to coordinate and lead a meeting focused on these issues. Shar, sorry.
I just wanted, can I just comment on the dates really quickly?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so of those dates, everything, the 12th or the 25th works, but the 26th is out for me.
Well, as long as we're doing this, good. Thanks, Vicki. So the 12th or the 25th work. Bettina?
Yes.
All three for September work for you? Or the 12th and the 25th? Sorry, that's what I'm asking.
The 12th or the 25th. I would prefer, I'm in the, okay, hold on, 12th. I have this wrong. My September 12th is a Sunday. August 12th is fine.
We're looking at August 12th or August 25th.
I can only do the 12th. Sorry.
Rosie, where do you?
I'm unavailable on both of those dates. I'm teaching on August 12th and I'm out of town on the 25th.
Okay, so why don't I suspend doing the person-to-person approach right now, because I just got in water deeper than I'm able to continue to tread. And we'll leave it in Haley's hands, who's going to send around a scheduling app to everybody. Shar had a comment, I believe. Shar, are you still there?
Yes, I'm sorry. It's just a question, actually. I've been hearing, I'm driving. So I've been hearing there's really good resources in the chat. Is that saved anywhere or available anywhere?
Haley's saying yes. Go ahead, Haley.
Yeah, the resources make their way into the meeting minutes, usually as links, if they were copied as links in the chat. So that'll become available before the next meeting.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for today, everyone.
All right. Next agenda item is announcements. Do we have any announcements from our commission members, commissioners? And any announcements from the public? Alrighty. As we hurtle towards adjournment, any last comments?
Congratulations on leading your first meeting.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go meditate for an hour after this harrowing experience. But thanks, everybody. That was a great meeting. We're ready for adjournment. I guess, how do we do this? I ask for someone to motion. No, Haley's just saying we can just call adjournment. All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Be safe.